In this data center gold rush, you said some markets are completely missing out. Is St. Louis one of them?
Positively. I think like so many other opportunities, like the railroads, like the airport, and people might think that's not relevant, but I think it's completely relevant. I think the show me state is not showing up to find out what they're missing. And honestly, it's baffling to me, the backlash, the misinformation campaigns, largely funded by a very small group of people that are taking hold against this really critical, important infrastructure, the, the electric, the power grid improvements, the data center infrastructure, all of it together is so critical to all communities across the country. And you can just look across the country and see where this stuff is being built and where they have really got a concentration of these kind of data centers and the infrastructure. All of those communities are benefiting tremendously from the data center boom. And St. Louis right now and the whole region is missing out on it.
If data centers are such a slam dunk, why did 25 projects get canceled last year?
Well, out of thousands, by the way. So I think, again, getting everything in context is really important. I also think there are places where, data centers are going to end up being much more acceptable than others. I saw, projects around the country that I thought, maybe could have been placed in better locations. But I think the locations that are being proposed, particularly in the St. Louis area, are largely remote or they're industrial approved sites, like the site in St. Charles is an industrial site. It's going to be approved for possibly a large, complex industrial warehouse and distribution building that would put off way more traffic and noise and work 24 hours a day. And these data centers are the ones that are already in the St. Louis community. People don't even know about them because they're quiet, they're clean. They do have emergency generators, but they only come on when there's an emergency.
They're also not hyperscale data centers just yet.
Some of them are pretty substantial and they're all mission critical. They all operate principally the exact same way. They're rooms, giantly packed with servers that have a lot of electricity use and have to have a generator backup.
Let's get into some of these specifics because I think there's a lot of interesting stuff here. You call opposition misinformation. What exactly are people getting wrong?
Yeah, I think some of the misinformation, well, plenty of the things that are out there, particularly driven by, like I said before, a small group of opponents, mainly led by the opposition that started in St. Charles, which was mainly to protect some residential compounds near the project. Those people funded Facebook pages. They said that we were going to pollute the water. They said we were going to have way more diesel fuel on the site than we really were going to have. One comment that I think we are listening to very carefully is the word transparency. I think that like all real estate deals done in the last, 50 years, when you're negotiating with a city or community, that has traditionally been done in a kind of a transparent way to protect all the parties during a real estate negotiation, which is a sensitive time. Most communities recognize that the council has to know what's going on.
Are
the
you
planning
suggesting
and zoning people have to know what's going on.
Yeah,
but as you know yourself, there are times when you're negotiating a real estate deal when there are competitive things going on in the background that you have to have some privacy. However, I think when it comes to data centers, all of the technology companies, all of the developers, and us as a developer are aligned that we need to be way more transparent. The cities, the communities, the people, they need to know what's in it for them. And so we've gotten some good lessons learned out of the process, but the misinformation goes to that these things cause a lot of pollution. That's not true. That they're noisy. That's not true. That they don't create jobs. That's not true. These things create thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs during what is usually a pretty long construction period. We don't build it in a year and then we'll disappear. They take, they go in phases. And, these things have been game changers for construction labor. But then even when they're finished, depending on the size of these, they could have hundreds of jobs that are permanent: property management job, asset management jobs, technology jobs with the servers. But then there's always renovation. There's always replacing the servers. So there's always lots of construction and lots of local jobs that are created that are important to the communities.
Yeah, you talk about construction jobs, electrician jobs, but what happens when the construction, the concrete mixers, the cranes leave town? I mean, these things are giant warehouses full of computers and wires. How many people actually work inside one?
Yeah, hundreds. I mean, I don't know, compared to a lot of light manufacturing, very similar numbers. So the bad rap that they get, that they don't have thousands of jobs like a car plant, those days are over for the car plants too. The car plants are using robotics, all manufacturing is using less, humans to do the work inside the manufacturing. So I think getting that in context is really important. And here's the answer to your question about what happens after the cranes leave and that the construction stops. You end up with a very quiet, usually very calm looking building with great landscaping around it that you can't really hear, you can't really see, that has very low traffic, that doesn't cause your schools to get burdened by a bunch more, people in the schools, and you get tax revenue. That's what you get after all of the cranes leave.
And there it is. There's the pivot. You've been on defense, rebutting the obstacles that you've seen. There's the proactive offensive message about what's in it for them. I want to ask you about the cities and the municipalities that have said yes to these big projects. Are projects like yours, companies like yours, are you choosing cities because they're business friendly, or are they saying yes because they're desperate?
Well, I don't think the word desperate's fair, but I think that all cities have fiduciary responsibility to their constituents to try to have a balanced budget, to make their schools better, to provide police protection, to have better fire districts. And I think there's absolute proof that in communities that are building this kind of technological park in their cities and in their suburban areas, that they are generating way more revenue than they originally thought. And that revenue takes the form of, tax revenue, but it also creates lots of jobs, still around to support the data centers, as I said before. But then you also have a utility tax that most communities get a part of that, and they're game changers. A lot of these data centers are producing the same kind of revenue for communities that casinos do. And that's substantial revenue.
How do we know that these big data centers will continue to profit years into the future and will continue to pay into public coffers?
All of these deals that I'm involved in, and I'm involved in over 50 projects across the country, are very, very long-term horizons. So anybody who thinks these things, people are going to spend, $5 or $6 billion and it's going to last 5 years is way wrong. These are going to be, there's not going to be anything but upside for the data centers. The chips are going to change, the cooling is going to change, the technology will get better, but the consumption of the digital age is only going to increase by multiples over the next 10 to 20 years. But to answer your question more specifically, these are long-term leases, these are long-term arrangements, and they're long-term commitments to the utilities. Utilities are not going to provide a substation without a long-term guarantee from a creditworthy entity, and that's what's happening.
I know Meta, Amazon, some others are engaging in these, they're signing these long-term power purchase agreements. Do those power purchase agreements strengthen a utility company's balance sheet, or do they lock in the public's long-term exposure to higher rates?
Well, I think you've heard even President Trump has talked about protective measures about residential utility bills, being protected from the use of this. Our grid has not been improved in the last 20 years. I mean, power consumption until the data center age has been going down across the country. And with COVID and the Great Recession, we have seen a decline in capital improvements in the power plants and in the grid. And quite frankly, the United States grid is behind the curve right now. So there has to be a lot of investment made regardless, but the data centers are absolutely driving positive revenue to help defray the cost of these grid improvements that have to be made regardless. And in Missouri, as an example, we just passed legislation that the technology companies have to pay their fair share, and that there's direct residential customer protection in Missouri, and I think that's spreading across the country. And we've heard some of the some of the technology companies, like Microsoft, just made a written commitment, very big publicity splash, that they are going to protect consumers and that they're going to pay their fair share. I think that's a big win for them.
Yeah, you're talking about Senate Bill 4 that Governor Kehoe championed and got across the finish line very early into his first days in office. There's some dispute over how well that will work, as utility companies generally pass off the cost of building out the pipeline to deliver that power to the ratepayers. And power consumption is a totally separate channel. I don't know how you weigh that. If the cost of generating, or really if the cost of delivering that power rises, who ultimately absorbs it?
Well, if it wasn't for data centers and that the grid has to be repaired, who ultimately pays for it are the same customers. Here we have a source of revenue to help offset the cost.
Mm-hmm. Is this the right time then for Missouri to ban solar power buildouts?
I don't think that any state should ban anything. I think you have to take every single project, project by project, weigh all of the unintended consequences, the real consequences, and the upside, and make a balanced decision on any project, whether it's a car plant, a data center, a solar project. Solar is going to be a really important, critical part of the overall makeup of the energy grid. And anytime the public gets engaged, like without the right information to make decisions, is not even in their own best interest.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned at the start the smart money, the investors who are putting a lot of money into this. And I was reading a McKinsey report. They're projecting this absolute boom of private capital, which is latching onto the skeleton of public infrastructure here. The number they suggested was that companies will invest $7 trillion building data centers over the next 4 years, and almost half of that, about 40% of that investment, that CapEx, here in the U.S. Isn't this whole profit model built on a foundation of socialized risk?
Well, I don't think I can speak intelligently about that. I haven't seen the McKinsey report, and I don't know what socialized risk is.
Public infrastructure is
what I would say is
it's all built on public infrastructure, but it's private
What I would
profit.
say is this. Yeah, what I would say is this, is that the digitization of everything is going to change everything. We're seeing it at Clayco. My customers are seeing it. My subcontractors are seeing it. My kids see it. People use their iPads to babysit their kids now. I'm against that, but we're going to see autonomous cars. I'm for that. We're going to see technology becoming a bigger and life-improving asset in our future, and it's only going to grow. So I think, you know, there's no false promises here. This is reality. This is what's really happening, is the digitization of everything is a reality. I think we're going to see robotics. I think we're going to see autonomous cars, and I think we're going to see a cure to cancer. I honestly believe that we are part of amazing research that is going to have life-changing implications for all people around the world.
So it sounds like you think St. Louis would be missing out if leaders in this region don't ultimately land one or more big data center projects. Let me ask you this then, because I know you're involved in, as you said, dozens of these projects around the country. If a company comes to you tomorrow and says, we want to build a big data center in St. Louis, what's the first thing that you would check? Is it whether there's enough power available right now, or would we have to build out new infrastructure before anything else could move forward?
I mean, it's not that complicated of a question. You need land and you need power, you need fiber, you need the basics, and you need a community that understands what they're benefiting from it. And most communities, when they really get the facts and they really dig in and they really get rid of all the misinformation, they really learn what the revenue stream is going to be for their community. They really understand what the credit is. You can't do it like on an interview like this. You need to dig into the details. But where communities have really done the research on behalf of their constituents, these projects are getting approved. And even some of the projects that you mentioned that were turned back, ultimately, I think all of those, the vast majority of those will end up being approved eventually.
Mm-hmm.
I think once the communities get the facts, in every case I've been involved in, the projects have ultimately ended up being successful.
We've got the fiber optics, we've got the transmission, we've got all those interconnected hard wire grid
St. Louis has
things,
St.
abundant
Louis
water
has it
supply.
all. St. Louis has it all. 90 billion gallons of water goes by the arch every day. 90 billion gallons every day. St. Louis has it all. St. Louis would be an epicenter of this type of activity. What we don't have right now is the right kind of information to the right people, and we don't have the right kind of proponents, like the people who are going to get the jobs, the training centers, those kind of people. We need more people to learn more about the positive aspects. And I would say one other thing, when we get interested citizens to go see data centers in Cedar Rapids or in Oklahoma or in Indiana, they're amazed at like what is causing all the opposition.
Mm-hmm.
These facilities are run by America's most amazing companies. They're quiet, they don't create pollution, they pay their fair share, and they're good ultimately for the revenue streams for these communities. They're building new schools, they're building new firehouses. I mean, there's some case studies like Quincy, Washington, where there have been a good number of data centers built in a small farm town. If you talk to the mayor there, he'll tell you it has been a game changer in a positive way for their community.
Yeah, they were kind of there staking out ground early, and that being there first often helps. I wonder about, I don't know if it's both and. I don't know if data centers take both power and water. It seems like the closed loop systems that can recycle the water, they take a lot of the power. The ones that need the constant input of water take a lot less in draining on the power grid, from what I've been reading. I want to ask you about which of those two projects would be better situated in St. Louis, because developers talk about being able to flip the switch on time. So in plain English, how long would it actually take to get a project fully powered up here? And how does St. Louis compare to places like Dallas or Northern Virginia?
Yeah, I'm not completely clear on the question. You know, they use about the same amount of electricity. So if you have a project that's a 30 megawatt data center, it's going to use 30 megawatts of electricity. That's going to give them a certain amount of computer power in the building. And what you're talking about is that electricity and the servers, you know, and the chips generate heat.
I think it's
And
the
so you have
cooling component,
cooling.
right?
Yeah, and so you have to cool them. And traditionally in the past, and I think this is old technology, they were water cooling these because water was abundant and it wasn't an issue. Um, Today, the systems are mostly closed loop systems, and they use about the same amount of water as a residential subdivision might use,
So nobody's
but it's not
using,
the drastic numbers that are being thrown around.
so nobody's
And
using the old system you call old technology now, where there's that constant
yeah,
in-stream of
the
water?
technology changes every 6 months. It's getting better and better. And I saw Microsoft made an impressive announcement today about new technology and the infrastructure of the grid, which is going to reduce the size of transmission lines and that sort of thing. And it's just going to get better and better.
So then why does St. Louis's abundant water supply matter at all then?
Well, I'm not, like I said, I'm not sure it's a major factor. I think the fact that we have abundant water in St. Louis and, it gives us options on the systems that we use. But St. Louis uses about 65 or 70% less water than they did 25 years ago because of all the manufacturing that we've lost in St. Louis. But, you know, I think it's a engineering question of what is best for your community. I don't think that you would spend a lot of extra money to cool the same as you would in Phoenix, Arizona, as you would in St. Louis, if you were weighing the pros and cons of using more water consumption. If we have the water, we should be able to use it.
I'm a few credits shy of my engineering degree, so I'll save those questions for the nerds at the water department. I think I'm scheduled to see them later this week. All right, bottom line,
Exactly.
is St. Louis behind on the data center gold rush because it cannot compete or because it has not decided to?
The St. Louis region lacks a cohesive strategy for growth, period. And I think that needs to be addressed. And, I've been a longtime proponent for the civic community to work closer with our local elected officials to develop a great strategic plan, which would be a growth strategy. St. Louis has been passed over by lots of opportunities, quite frankly. I love St. Louis. I care deeply about St. Louis. Listen, I could go build the data centers anywhere. I want them to be in St. Louis because I don't want St. Louis to be passed over.
Including downtown?
I'd love downtown. I think downtown is really critical to the community. If you look across the top 25 metropolitan areas, the downtown plays a crucial role, whether it's still the geographic center or not. And our downtown will always be really important to our community.
Yeah, I wonder, do you see downtown as fertile soil for a data center?
Oh, I mean, there's certainly locations that were traditionally big manufacturing plants where they have power. Look at the old General Motors plant. Look at, there's plenty of sites in the city of St. Louis that are 100%. And I think the Armory site is an outstanding choice. I'm not involved in that project, but I support it, and I think it's an outstanding location for a data center. Nobody was even thinking about that site until this all came up. And when you go down and drive around and look at the site, it's a data center site. There's a big substation right there.
Yeah.
So the infrastructure is there for it, and that's an excellent site, and that would generate enormous revenue for the city of St. Louis. And I don't see the city in a position right now to turn away things that could be beneficial to the revenue stream.
My last question for you is this one. I've heard you describe this whole thing as a communication problem, a public understanding problem. And I heard you earlier in this interview say that maybe the transparency play, keeping some people in the dark early on when companies wanted privacy, they favored privacy, maybe that raised the ire of suspicion from the public. Is that a concession that maybe asking public officials to enter into non-disclosure agreements backfired?
No, I think that traditionally non-disclosure agreements are the right way to go because you have real estate developers, say even if you're building a subdivision, competing for the same pieces of land and that sort of thing. I think taking away some level of confidentiality for communities to negotiate in good faith. If you just take a look at our Olive Market retail project where the University City did an RFP process, everything they did that needed to be transparent was transparent. If you look at the success of what we were able to accomplish in University City under Mayor Crow and his visionary leadership there, what a game changer for that community. They had a bunch of dilapidated old buildings that were not generating any revenue for the city. They put together an amazing feasibility plan. They did an RFP and gave a master developer the developer rights to develop the property, even using some eminent domain and long-term vision. But there were times when using non-disclosure agreements in that project were critical and very important. But the city council and the people behind the closed doors had all the facts all the time. And I think that's the way these projects have to be done. But I do think you're going to see a lot more transparency when it comes to this type of infrastructure, data center infrastructure going forward.
All right, Bob Clark with Clayco, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.